Alright, so this one actually changed at the very last second. Right up until about 24 hours ago, this one was going to be The Conversation and The Lives of Others. But then as I was watching The Lives of Others back again, I realized that the tones don't exactly... I mean, obviously the subject matter goes together pretty much perfectly, but there was just something about the tones to where I was like... I felt more like it'd be better off to go towards... because obviously the conversation was heavily influenced by Antonioni's blow-up, as clearly was De Palma's blowout, and I'd always been looking for a reason to talk about blowout anyway, so I figured that The Lives of Others will probably end up with something, but I figured this one in the long run was more appropriate to go with the two of these. Not that it always matters to me if they line up perfectly or anything, but yeah, in this case I kind of figured it would be these two are better suited towards each other. And I figure we'll start with The Conversation, where, well, the one thing that kind of starts off immediately when we see this opening shot that Haskell Wexler shot before he was fired, but basically the whole idea surrounding both of these, and you can throw The Lives of Others into this as well, just sort of this whole fascination around eavesdropping and how it's this sort of thing that it's kind of the perfect thing to make a movie about, because it's just this whole... Because obviously no matter what, you're separated between... There's a separation between the movie and the audience, with the screen in between them. So whether you're watching a movie, no matter what kind of movie it is, there's always this whole thing about almost like you're watching something, and in many cases it's something that you know you're not supposed to, and it almost feels like you're getting away with something by seeing this. So with movies like this, that you pretty much just totally and completely run with that from all aspects, and it said especially if you're going towards more like the thriller territory, especially like slow burn stuff like these are. And it's one of those things where even if you have no other intention, it's still just... There's just this fascination of watching something that seems like it shouldn't be viewed by anybody, and there's sort of the double-edged sword of that, where that's usually accompanied by guilt, depending on your conscience, which obviously The Conversation goes into deeply, especially with Harry's religion. So when it starts off, when we're watching this scene when they're recording Frederick Forrest and the girl that may or may not be the wife or girlfriend of Robert Duvall, the very mysterious upper whatever the hell he is, the director, and there's something here that immediately kind of gives us this almost intentionally false idea of how Harry sees his work when he and John Cazale are in the van and they're recording it, and he's saying that he doesn't care what they're talking about, he just wants a big fat recording. And in the moment, he may mean that, but obviously we've already had an issue here where he did something in this line of work that apparently got a few people killed, and it's been hanging over his head ever since. So it's clear to us, once that's established eventually, that it's probably more than just that to him, at least. It may have been the whole, I just want a recording and nothing else, it doesn't matter. May have been what he was before this happened, and he's kind of trying to get back into there. But obviously this is only going to worsen that guilt, so, especially as it goes on. And it's really fascinating to watch this character, because there's obviously come a certain, I guess, irony of sorts, given what his job is, which of course makes him totally and completely paranoid that this could be happening to him at any moment as well. So he's like a loner that does his very best to not keep friends and barely acquaintances. He's got his apartment all locked up. The only thing he really does is play his saxophone. And it's to the point to where his landlady has gotten into his apartment, because she's the landlady, of course she has a key. Which is apparently a surprise to him because of how private he tries to be and enclosed he wants to be, but she has left him a birthday card and a gift. And the thing about this is that he doesn't really see this as some friendly notion. He sees it as, how the fuck did you get into the apartment? And how do you have a key? Why do you have a key? Why am I not the only one that has one? And the way he also kind of, that curt way he is, and the way he questions her when he's like on the phone with her and he says, how old do you think I am? But we already know he knows the answer to this because he's opened the card and it says 44 in it. And he doesn't seem to confirm or deny that she's right or not. But she's close enough to where it's alarming, because later when he's talking to his girlfriend, whoever she is, he says that he's 42. And it's like, I sort of like to think he's neither. And that's just how secretive he is. Like he's 43 or 41 or something. But it's like just that he feels so sort of like violated by this, that he's basically saying, like, if I can just take a year or two off, that gives me just a little bit more of them not knowing whatever. And it gets down to that, but then and that's also sort of the paranoia continues when he's with his girlfriend, and it's like every single little thing that she says or does seems like this blatant reminder of what he does or what he's working on, up to the song that's on the recording that she starts singing. And it just immediately gives him this vibe that everybody around him knows more than they should. Much like himself in this scenario. And obviously there's the whole thing I was talking about where his religion basically really adds to the guilt of this. Like, it's probably already there a little bit before an incident even happened. But then that's also... they also sort of take that in interesting directions with this dream sequence we get towards the end. Where one of the more prominent lines in it is, I'm not afraid of death, I'm afraid of murder. That kind of shows you exactly where he's coming from and where the situation has put him and how he views everything pretty much from now on because of that. And then, obviously, also with that, talking about him being a lot closer to the work than he probably wants to let on. How the paranoia surrounding that job that went wrong, when he basically refuses to give the tapes to Harrison Ford because he's been promised he was going to meet Robert Duvall personally to hand them to him, and now Ford is like this sort of middle ground he wasn't expecting, that he is immediately untrustworthy. And you can, even without the paranoia that Harry already has in him, Martin Stead is a really shady motherfucker. Just in all aspects. I don't care if he bakes Christmas cookies. There's still something totally off about him. And I love the way they play with that, especially after he's leaving the office, after he's said that he's not going to he gives the money back and he's not going to give the tapes, and he gets into the elevator, and we see Ford just kind of peer around that corner just as the door's shut, and it really kind of gives you that sort of old-fashioned, we're always watching you vibe, which we get pretty much every time we see him. That even continues when he's just sort of lurking around the convention, and he just kind of has these constant, almost warning looks. Even when we learn that he's at the convention just to set up the meeting, there's still just like, it always feels like there's something else that we don't quite know whenever Harrison Ford is here. And I love the way they've done. Speaking of the convention, this has got to be like one of the more fascinating movie scenes, like settings, in movies, basically. And it's like you could basically watch these convention scenes for hours, just watching Harry go from like booth to booth and all these guys explaining exactly how it goes more into that sort of just sort of a general guilty fascination with eavesdropping, where it's like all these different methods that they each have, that they've pretty much built themselves. And yeah, I like I said, that scene could have been hours long and it wouldn't have mattered. And obviously we have other characters in here that are in his life, like John Cazale. That's another reason I wanted to talk about the conversation, is I believe it's the last movie in John Cazale's filmography that I haven't talked about yet. So this is sort of a completion thing with that as well. And the interesting thing about this character is, like I talked about with, you know, the Godfathers and the Deer Hunter, it's like he's basically always the guy that's there to be shit on or to be some kind of nuisance, whether he means it or not. And here, it's like he basically sees what Harry's sort of putting together here, with this great process we watch him go through with all the different recordings and the way he pieces them together like a puzzle to get this one sentence, that he kills if he had the chance sentence, that just spells everything out, but nothing out at the same time. And Cazale's there to basically just see it as nothing. And it's like, it's just another job, and it could really amount to pretty much nothing. But the character also is like, sort of has this intrusive nature when it comes to Harry, where it's like, when he, not only is it just when he's in the room and when he's editing the sound together, and it's like his concentration's being broken by Kazale talking, but it's also he's intrusive because his voice is on the recording from when they were inside the van. And it's just like he's always sort of kind of standing in between Harry getting to this exact moment that he's trying to. But the interesting thing about that is the scene at the convention, and I'm sure most people probably just take this one way, but I don't know. There's something about it that's always made me kind of take it as a double thing, and that is the scene where he finds out that Kazale started working with Moran, who's basically his rival, and he like begs John Cazale to come back, basically, and keep working with him and all that, and how he thinks he's, you know, found something out with this recording, or at least put it together in a certain way. And the way he, like, begs for him back, I imagine most people probably can just see it as, because he knows so much, and it's like he kind of wants to keep that in close quarters. And you can pretty much just leave it at that. But I don't know, there is something almost sincere in the way Harry begs for him to come back that I think is, like, I think there's multiple clues that Harry is obviously as distant as we see him, but I don't feel like he wants to be. It might seem like that for sure, especially in certain aspects, probably so. But overall, I do think that there's like, because it's not only that, but he also sort of like, because that was like the closest thing he has to a friend, pretty much, if you don't count the girlfriend, whoever she is. And so there are scenes throughout when it's not just the scene where he begs Cazale to come back, but like when he's with the hooker at the party, and he seems to like kind of, he almost seems desperate to open up in some way. And then that goes into, because obviously there is a sort of contrast here, and it kind of goes back and forth, because when he's at the party, we do see that, like, even when there's a whole bunch of people around, there's still something distant about him. Like, while everybody's mingling or telling stories or whatever the hell, he seems most acquainted with that turn the lights off note on that's hanging down from the light. So there is something there, but then in that same scene, it's like there's a certain pride about him where he gets to brag about his microphones and the stuff that he's put together and all that. But then that's immediately brought down when he realizes he's been bugged. And the thing is, it's like, you sort of just immediately see him revert back into himself when he's like, I do feel like there's that certain desperation to open up that we barely see, but it's there. But there's always something like that. Something big, like the incident we hear about, or something, to us it probably seems small, but to Harry it's a huge deal that he got caught off guard. And so it's like, when we see how he's so protective of himself and the way he keeps everything locked up and distant, and it's like, in that moment, we basically see Harry say, this is why that is. Like, this is why I never let my guard down, because when I do, this shit happens. I get bugged. And so it really kind of gives us an understanding of the character, and why he's pretty much so into the work and pretty much nothing else. Because there's even those moments where, once he has the tapes playing, like, obviously he's already obsessive in one way, but then there's the scene with the hooker where we actually see him, like, in a really vulnerable state, when he's, like, you know, like, the hooker's, like, undressing, and he's just, like, kind of letting these emotions out. But even in this most intimate of moments for him, the tapes are still playing in the background. And he's still kind of trying to piece that together while all this other stuff is happening. And even and that's not the only way either. They really effectively use the tapes in the background. There is the scene where Robert Duvall is finally revealed, and it's just kind of just this really quiet scene of him trying to go through the motions of getting paid and leaving and all that, but also making sure nothing's going to get out of control. But it's almost all silence except for the tapes. And there's even the moment when it's a tad on the nose, of course, but still really effective, when he goes up to Duvall and he says, you know, what are you going to do to her? And the tape answers for him, when Frederick Forrest says he'd go if he got the chance. Like I said, on the nose, sure, but still really effective and really cool, too. And really, like, foreboding in this really sinister way as well. And then, of course, that eventually takes us to the big hotel scene that goes in an unexpected direction, to say the least, especially with the way this sort of jumps out at us when we see, like, the bloody handprint and the scream and all that, after the movie's been so quiet and calm up to this point, where we know something really drastic has just happened. in this whole sequence where he's like searching the hotel, and it's like, once again, this is like, because we've already had the dream sequence that we know is a dream sequence, even if we didn't cut back to Harry like sleeping as it was happening. Just the way it looks with the fog and all that, we know it's a dream sequence when we're looking at it. Even if you're seeing the movie for the first time, you can probably put that together. So then we've got this hotel scene, which may or may not also be a dream sequence, and it's still, even though it's not as blatant because it doesn't have like, you know, the fog and all that, or it's not shot in a particularly different way than everything else, or at least the most normal scenes. There is something that feels sort of weirdly dreamlike about it, like something kind of surreal in a way, especially with the way it sort of, everything just sort of reappears as it floods and the blood and all that. It's very over the top to be something that's actually happening. But we're never really quite, there's really no confirmation to that, but I think there's gotta be, like, maybe partial truth to it, like perhaps he did eventually discover something to that extent, but not to the, or to a certain extent to that, but not to the degree that we see, where it's almost like, it's much more symbolic looking the way it's shown to us. And then the way we sort of get flashes of it, what could have possibly happened and probably happened, but that definitely feels more like sort of what Harry's mind is suggesting to itself what probably happened and the way it was viewed. So that adds a whole kind of interesting, ambiguous quality to it also, which ultimately leads to this final scene of just his total and complete self-destruction as Martinstead once again proves just how damn sinister he is, with the ominous calls and the whole saxophone thing, and it's like he knows that he's bugged, and we just see there's all kinds of destruction, whether it be internal or literal, as he looks for this bug, even destroying his, you know, Virgin Mary statue to get there. Just really, like I said, just really ramming that guild home. And then that last shot, obviously, it seems pretty obvious when you think about it, but obviously the wide belief is the bug's in the saxophone, but that's going to be the one thing that he doesn't destroy no matter what. So, yeah, so that's pretty much what the conversation is. Like I said, it's very, very small. It is interesting to see it as like this. It came out the same year as Godfather 2, so he was pretty, I don't know if he was doing it simultaneously with Godfather 2 or what, but how it's this thing in between Godfather 1 and 2, just this small thing amidst these giant epics. And I think he calls it like his most personal project, which is very interesting, but you can also kind of see that also with how just sort of deep of a character study it is, even if it does sort of flirt with like this thriller territory and all that. And so yeah, so many great things about it. I think Gene Hackman said it's his favorite movie that he did, which says a lot given his resume. So yeah, obviously like a classic in its own right, particularly like when you hear about how much people love the era of the 70s and all the movies that came with that, this is usually one that's like right at the top of the list of why that is. So, yeah, and one of the 5 Best Picture nominations from that year also, despite the fact that I think it came out pretty early, it only got 3 nominations overall, and it missed 2 insane ones with Hackman and actor and editing were surprisingly missing, but yeah, but it still kind of stands out being the small movie that it is in that lineup. Like Lenny, a big biopic, Bob Fosse biopic no less, was in there, and Chinatown was in there, and The Towering Inferno. So yeah, but it does very much stand out in what was really a really great year. So let alone the decade itself, or movie history, however you want to look at it. So yeah, that's basically what the conversation is. So going on to Blowout, where we have this opening that is, because obviously we know we're going into a De Palma movie, and the thing here is that we have this opening of Travolta being the sound guy on this, you know, basic slasher movie, and it's sort of, like, as you're watching it, you're sort of like, it seems almost odd how much of a De Palma movie it feels like when we're watching this movie within a movie. It's like it's like this, we're watching a De Palma movie where they're making a De Palma movie without layers, is what's happening here. And yeah, and as I said, once again, even in the title, a lot of Pole, because usually we talk about, and they're in here, believe me. De Palma loves his Hitchcock references, but obviously Antonioni is in here just as much, if not more, because that's kind of the full basis. But on top of that, we do have a lot of different, what seems to be references to multiple sort of political history things. Like we've got the car flying off the bridge and into the water, where the political figure was in the car with a woman he probably shouldn't have been, is very much mirroring the Chappaquiddick thing. And then there's the whole obsessing over the recordings and playing them back again and again, which gives you the idea of the JFK assassination. And then just in general, the whole, incriminating audio just is synonymous with Watergate at this point. So, and the way he mixes all of that in, but without making it feel like it's like a politically driven movie, seems like it'd be pretty difficult, but he managed to make, he didn't go in that territory more than he needed to, which I feel like a lesser movie probably would have done. So yeah, it really sticks to its roots of this is a movie about a guy that, makes movies called Bloodbath and Bordello of Blood, which, weirdly enough, Tales from the Crypt would turn into an actual movie later down the road. But, and obviously it begins with him saving Nancy Allen from this wreckage, before it turns into this almost Twilight Zone thing, where it's like, everybody's trying to tell him that what happened didn't happen, and it's quick to get you out of it, and you realize it's the whole politically driven thing of what they're trying to accomplish here. But at the start there, it's sort of really disorienting when they almost like try to gaslight him and make him think that a lot of what just happened didn't actually happen, before they just break it down for him. And as far as Nancy Allen goes, I have heard some criticism, and I'm sure it would be easy to say that the only way you could get away with a performance like this is because she was married to De Palma at the time. But yeah, I do get that her performance does almost feel like it's in an entirely different movie. It's almost like two movies are playing simultaneously whenever her character's here, and it can be a bit weird, but I do think there's also something particularly genuine here. And like she may seem like, overly icky sweet or naive or something, especially in the way in which Travolta takes to her. But I do think there's something sort of like, especially that sort of genuinely sweet moment when they're in the hospital and she realizes that she's not wearing makeup, or at least enough. And there's like a moment between them where we realize the connection that's going to drive the decisions that Travolta makes. She plays a big part. I mean, obviously there's plenty of reasons here, but she plays a big part in what ends up being Travolta's obsession with what's going on here, and how he manages to get roped into it as much as he does, or as invested as he is. And so that in itself makes the character important enough that I can get past if it seems like the performance might be a bit much, especially given her surroundings. If there's one thing that I do think stands out in a way that's maybe not so great, it would probably be the Dennis Franz scenes, where I do get the idea that this has got to be like a very big task to get the tapes from this dude, this type of dude, but it does feel, the scenes feel very long and very tedious in a movie that like moves like a bullet. The pacing in this is insane, especially with one of the great things this movie does, and one of the more fascinating things about it, is what I was talking about with Hackman and the conversation, which is just watching the process in general of how he goes through this. Like, it's one thing to watch his sound process, but when he starts to bring picture into it, which really brings in the blow-up influence, where we watch the entire process of him taking the pictures from the magazine, putting them together like a flip book, then deciding to make the film out of them, then putting the sound with the film, and we see this in practically real time. And it's sort of one of those cases where it's like, this is the kind of movie where, one thing it also does, that I almost failed to mention, was that it really shows off the pride. I was talking about that too with Harry Call, the pride that the Travolta character has in his work, where he has to say, like, I'm a sound guy, there's no, confusion here about what I heard. And we get to see that in just this whole process that he's able to put this together and make this whole film out of just these crude things that he had to start with. Um, and the thing about it is, it's like, this is kind of, like, it's involving in a way that's, like, almost risky. If, like, the audience doesn't quite have a grasp on the movie yet, or the full attention. And it's like, this is basically the way of saying, like, if the movie doesn't have your attention at this point, fuck you entirely, because we're going to show you the entire process of this, and if you don't like it now, it's only going to get worse for you, but if you love it, you're going to really, that investment's going to go a really long way and be really rewarding as we get to watch this whole process. And the interesting thing about that also, as we talk about his process, well, there's another character that's introduced in this movie that also sort of has his own process that we get to see done in real time. Where we've got the John Lithgow character that comes in. And the thing about this is that obviously he could have just been like this, you know, assassin character or killer or whatever. But the interesting thing about this is that it does, watching his process does basically give you two movies at once. It gives you the conspiracy movie, and then Lithgow comes in and basically gives us an entirely separate serial killer movie. But at the same time, how it all ties together, and we get to see this whole when we first see him kill that first girl, it almost feels like its own sort of separate scene, similar to like the flashback sequence we get of how, once again, like Harry Cole, this character has this horrible thing that happened with him trying to do this as like a take on other jobs with this sort of sound thing that he does outside of movies, and how horribly it went, and how that ends up sort of mirroring what the kind of thing that Lithgow does. So the thing here is, Lithgow has his own process where it's not just him killing a random girl. This is all part of the plan, where he's sort of, it's the whole, we're going to make it look like this is a series of events, so that when we get to Nancy Allen, nobody thinks anything of it, and there's no conspiracy about it. It's just a series of killings. So seeing those two totally different processes from essentially our hero and antagonist, is just really interesting, and like I said, takes us in seemingly two different directions, giving us two different movies, but they do all come together gloriously, especially for this big climax with this really awesome chase sequence and this just constant suspense of how much they drag out what happens once Lithgow and Nancy Allen meet, where we think it's going to be instantaneous, but Lithgow just kind of keeps getting almost caught in the moment, and it just has to go on, and you just are with it the whole time, and it just really plays on the suspense brilliantly, sort of in a Hitchcock type way, go figure. So obviously it's also got, I heard sometimes there's a criticism that the movie might be a bit overshot, like some people see it as like pretentious or whatever. I think it really sort of gives it its own personality, especially when you see, I was talking about this with Raising Cain just very recently, how De Palma is able to really make his own through his homages, to where you can tell the homages, but it still feels like his movie regardless. And so we get these shots like, we see this in various different ways, but usually the context is there's somebody very much in the foreground that's being watched by somebody in the background, but both are in focus. It's not like there's one is out of focus or more prominent, or one we're actually watching. Watching both at the same time, and one's usually watching the other, sometimes whether they know it or not. But they also play with this, like when he picks up the ice pick and stuff like that. And it just really gives the movie this whole sort of personality of itself that stands out, and really gives it this flair that I don't think is overdone or anything. And we also get like the scene when he realizes the tapes have been erased, and the way the camera just sort of spins around and makes the scene more and more, you know, urgent and disorienting as it happens, and the more he realizes just how much he's fucked at this point, really adds to that. So, so basically, and they also managed to, I talked about also with Raising Cain, that De Palma has a way of like really playing with genres a lot, where he's got like I was talking about how you've got like this sort of serial killer movie, and you've got the conspiracy movie, and then like I said, you've got these ways where he can just really, really disorient you in sometimes really horrific ways. But yeah, obviously there's going to be a sense of humor in it also, because that's really just the De Palma way. Particularly this, but
there's an interesting twist on that in this particular case, because really the main sort of source of humor in the movie is this little side thing that's continuing throughout the whole movie that starts at the very beginning with them trying to find the perfect scream for this movie. And it's like throughout the movie that's a source of humor, as we see the second scene when he's like trying other girls out and it's just not working out. And you really just never, ever, ever suspect that this little bit of this little side thing, seemingly for the sake of humor, is going to come full circle in like the most tragic way you could possibly imagine, taking us to the very last scene of the movie. And that is just so fucked and sick and twisted, but brilliant and amazing as well. I love that fucking ending so much. I can't even express that in words how much. And then it really comes down to like, you know, if I really have to choose, you know, between the two, and it's like this, like, do I really have to? Because it's usually like it's either really one-sided or there's an easy choice, but I mean, it does, despite how much they have in common, which is like shockingly a lot, they still could not feel more different, particularly in their execution as well. Because Blowout is just De Palma up and down all the way, and The Conversation just has so much, you know, of Coppola's stamp on it. And those are coming from totally different directions. I mean, if I had to choose between the two, I think it's the fact that The Conversation can do all this stuff, but it also... Because Blowout has some really strong three-dimensional characters in it, and some nice side characters, too. I love the news guy that's basically just trying to convince Travolta in normal conversation to give him the tapes, but he's using his news guy voice to do it. But even so, just the fact that The Conversation is like this deep character study, even if it's mainly one character, just how much that adds to a movie. Just watching The Conversation, you can really see just how much that adds. So, I mean, I guess, you know, I would say The Conversation is the superior movie, and why it's considered, you know, one of the greats of one of the, you know, most prominent decades in movie history. Yeah, that's easy to see and that's easy to understand. So, but I mean, Blowout definitely holds its own. I really need the Criterion. I hear the Criterion Blu-ray looks amazing. It's like on this DVD you can tell like it looks very 1981, but not in always the best ways. But so hopefully I can get my hands on that before too long. So. Yeah, so that's what we're looking at here. The next one is going to be... the next two are going to be with my brother, but I'm not sure... And I know what they are, I'm just not sure which one's going to come first. One of them is a trilogy of movies, and the other is just a normal one like this. So, but about something entirely different. So, yeah, so whenever all that stuff is, and we've got, you know, the Blunt thing's going to continue, the reviews are going to continue, all that stuff. So, until all that stuff, that's it.